Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Human Stories, we retell those moments honest every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. The rain started before dusk, a slow sweep across the Blue Ridge that turned the porch board slick and made the old light above the steps stutter. I was pulling a tray of cranberry orange bread from the oven when the phone buzzed. Kara's name lit the screen. I wiped my hands and answered. "We're doing Christmas at my mom's," she said. Her voice sounded as neat as her kitchen. "It's simpler for everyone. You can stay home, Evelyn." I watched steam slip from the loaf and gather on the window. "All right," I said. "Sounds fine." "Great. We'll stop by after the holidays." A murmur behind her, a child laughing. "I'll let Dan call you." The line clicked and left me in the hush that follows a door closing. The kettle on the back burner breathed. The porch light flicked. I set the bread on a cooling rack and stood still until I could feel the echo of their house bright and loud fade out of mine. On the dining room wall, the frames made a constellation. Rob in his shop sawdust in his hair. Dan with a baseball cap too big for his head. A ticket stub taped beside a photo from New Orleans in 1983, both of us flushed from heat and beignets. Above it all, the small silver compass on a chain hung by a thumbtack when I cooked. I took it down and slipped it over my neck. The metal was cool against my skin. The kettle whistled. I poured water over a tea bag and watched the string twist. Cinnamon sticks lay drying on a saucer. The house smelled like orange peel and cloves and wet pine. The TV in the living room moved through its bright parade of holiday reunions, children leaping into arms, grandmothers clapping everything solved in 2 hours. I muted it. The silence was not complete. Rain has its own grammar. The phone rang again. Dan. I let it ring once more, then picked up. "Mom, hey," he said. Doors thudded somewhere on his end. "You good?" "I'm making tea." "Okay." Kara's mom really wants to host this year. He rushed on, filling the gaps before I could. "It'll be easier, less driving." "The kids are excited about Savannah. We'll swing by after, you know." "I know," I said. I held the compass between finger and thumb and felt the tiny pull of its needle. "Drive safe." "Are you upset?" He tried to make it light, the kind of question that dares no honest answer. "I'm fine," I said. We both let that word float. "Go before the rain gets worse." "Love you, Mom." "Love you." When the call ended, the room took a deep breath and settled. I cut a heel from the bread and ate it warm, its crust cracking bits of sugared peel catching on my teeth. I set the rest aside and carried my tea to the living room. The porch light blinked again and held. Outside the street glowed a wet amber. A neighbor jogged past with a hood up and a dog lifting its feet like it was dancing. I turned the TV off, and the dark screen threw back a faint picture of me in the room behind me, the outline of the tree in the corner, the stockings I had laid out but never hung, the armchair that had softened to Rob's shape, then to mine. I stood a moment in the reflection and tried to see the shape of this year. The house felt as if it were waiting for something. That was the hardest part, the waiting that went nowhere. Upstairs, the closet door stuck on the rug and then gave. Mothballs and cold cloth greeted me. On the top shelf, the suitcase sat under a film of dust. The handle had a hairline crack, the kind your finger finds every time. I set it on the bed and opened it. The interior was lined in satin with a tear near the hinge, stitched by my own hand years ago. I ran my palm over the fabric and remembered Rob's voice on the platform in New Orleans. "See, Ev, the world is not as big as it looks if you start walking." I closed the suitcase and left it open on the bed. Back downstairs, I pulled the laptop to me and typed into the search bar with the kind of care I use when I ask for a favor. Old World Christmas Tour solo. Photos bloomed. Glowing stalls. String lights over cobblestones. Hands around paper cups. Prague, Dresden, Budapest. A departure in 3 days out of Atlanta. The rain softened to a whisper that made the keys sound loud. I read the itinerary 3 times. I read the fine print. I zoomed in on a picture of a bridge lit like a necklace. The compass lay against my throat. East is just a word until you touch it. The porch light clicked. I did not look up. I held the cursor over Book Now and waited for the guilt that usually arrives dressed as reason. It did not come. I typed my name in careful letters. Evelyn Hart. The card numbers. The address that has held me and I have held in return. I clicked. The page refreshed and turned bright with a confirmation code. My face in the black of the window smiled back at me without asking permission. I stood and walked to the front door. The porch smelled like rain on old wood. The sill needed repainting. Somewhere down the street, a car door shut, and laughter traveled across wet air. I touched the porch light and felt its faint warmth. It flickered again and I screwed it tighter. It steadied. Inside, the heater hummed. The house adjusted. I packed in the slow way as if my hands needed to introduce themselves to every object. Wool socks, a sweater that still held a ghost of cedar, gloves from a drawer that never sees daylight, the little bottle of lotion that smells like rosemary. I slid Rob's journal from the bookshelf, the one with a corner chewed by a long-gone puppy. Brown ink clean block letters. Places we never went, lists of tools, a sketch of a boat he wanted to build. I put it with the sweater. I did not call to tell anyone. I did not need to explain an absence that had been requested. The quiet in the house changed its shape. It felt less like a blank and more like a room I had not noticed. I made a small supper. I washed the dishes. I turned the TV on and set it low, then off again. The world was still there either way. Night closed around the house. I went from room to room, switching off lamps, checking windows. In the bedroom, the suitcase waited with its mouth open. I set the compass on the nightstand and lay down. Rain moved across the roof in slow bands. I slept. In the dark before morning, the heater clicked and bled warmth into the vents. I woke early and made coffee. Steam drifted over the sink. The porch board shone in a narrow blue light. I sliced the bread and wrapped half of it in wax paper for the freezer. The other half I left on the counter, a habit I could not defend and did not need to. The phone buzzed. A new message from Dan. "We'll swing by after the holidays." He had added a heart. I held the screen until it went dim and set the phone face down on the table. On the porch, the light sputtered, then went out. I watched the filament fade. The rain had stopped. The street gleamed as if polished. I took the compass from my neck and pinned it back to the wall hook above the photos. I stood there a while, letting my eyes travel. The house did not feel smaller. It felt true. In the kitchen, the kettle began to whisper again. I turned toward the sound and reached for a cup. Morning came clear and spare. The rain had washed the sky and left the porch boards dark as coffee. I took the compass from the hook and slipped it back over my neck. The metal was a small, chilled moon against my collarbone. I locked the door and tested the porch light with my fingertip. It steadied. The street lay bright and wet, a ribbon that led away from the house without asking questions. Atlanta smelled like jet fuel pretzels and 100 brands of perfume drifting together. The terminal thrummed. People pulled suitcases that whispered along tile. A child in a red coat dragged a plush reindeer by one ear. I stood at the gate with my boarding pass and felt the soft shift under my feet that always comes before leaving. When the group was called, I moved with the rest, the compass ticking a small rhythm against my skin. On the plane, my seat was by the window. The wing wore a thin rim of frost. A tall man slid into the aisle seat, set his book in the pocket, and gave me a smile that felt like a door left open. His hair was silver and cut close. His hands were careful as if they remembered delicate work. "Heading home or heading out?" he asked. "Trying a new map," I said. He nodded and buckled his belt. We let the air settle. The flight attendants checked latches and counted with their eyes. Engines wound up into a long rising note. As we lifted, Atlanta folded into grids and curves, highways turning to threads. The sun found our row and warmed my shoulder. The man watched the light for a moment before speaking again. "I am Tom," he said. "Evelyn." He asked where I was starting from. I told him Asheville. He said he had driven through once in October, a ridge all aflame, bees dozing on asters. We traded a few small pieces. Not the census kind. The kind that lives under those facts. He asked what took me across the ocean in December. I said I wanted to stand where the streets shine wet with lights. He said he wanted to walk in a place where his house could not follow him. We fell quiet and stared out at clouds that looked dry and fixed until the wind cut them open. Prague met us with a clean cold that stung the cheeks. Cobblestones held a shine like fish scales. The air carried smoked cinnamon and the sweet brown scent of roasted chestnuts. Our group gathered by the baggage carousel, a soft circle of winter coats and knit hats. The guide lifted a paper sign and counted heads. Tom reached for my suitcase without thinking, and I let him. In the shuttle, the windows fogged as bodies breathed. Outside, shop windows glowed with star lanterns. In the square, an evergreen rose from the stones like a green mast, the lights threaded through its limbs. We checked into a narrow hotel that smelled of soap and old wood. In my room, the radiator clicked awake and knocked gently. I set the suitcase on a stand and watched a slate of sky lean close to the pane. The city gave off a low murmur of voices, blending with the roll of a tram and the soft squeal of brakes in the wet. That evening, the group crossed the Charles Bridge, the statues ribbed with shadow. Street musicians played a carol in a minor key. Tom walked half a step back as if he knew I liked to look. Vendors under tented stalls held up hand-carved ornaments. A woman with a red scarf sold paper stars that folded like silk. I bought one the color of cream and threaded with gold. The vendor wrapped it in tissue and tied it with a strand of red string. "Something to hang in a window," Tom said. "Something to bring the light inside." We warmed our hands around cups of hot chocolate so thick the spoon stood for a breath before sinking. Chocolate left a sweet film on the tongue and cinnamon curled in the steam. We shared a bench while a small dog in a sweater bundled up against its owner's coat and slept. I could feel the city's old stones under my boots and the slow drift of their years. In the morning, we entered a church just as an organist began to practice. The sound climbed the ribs of the building and rolled back down. A woman 2 rows ahead cried quietly and did not wipe her face. Tom sat beside me and did not speak. In the gift corner, they sold slender tapers, pale beeswax that smelled faintly of summer. I bought 2 and slipped them into a side pocket of my coat. Dresden rose up out of a different past. The market there arched in wood and light. The Streisel marks spun a slow wheel of music. A baker powdered stolen and cut wedges for anyone who stopped. Flakes of sugar flew like snow and landed on coats. Tom laughed under his breath when it dusted my scarf. He brushed it off with the back of his knuckles and looked away as if he had touched something too tender. Choir voices lifted into the afternoon and carried across the square. I thought of the armchair at home and did not want to be in it. I wore the compass under my scarf and felt it move as I walked. Sometimes it seemed to settle, then shift again at the corner of a street. In a stall full of tin toys, I turned a small crank on a music box and heard a fragile line of carol notes. The sound was thin but brave. I cranked it again and let the notes thread through the cloth of my sleeve. The shopkeeper smiled and wrapped the box for a woman buying it for a child. The paper was blue with stars. We rode a train to Budapest with trees rushing backward, their branches black with winter. The sky kept promising snow, then thinking better of it. In the thermal baths, steam breathed up from pools held by stone. Older men played chess on a ledge and held the pieces as if they were warmed by the water. I sat under a lip of cloud face turned to a pale sun, air cold on knuckles and forehead shoulders heavy in heat. Tom emerged from the mist beside me, hair damp, eyes soft. He pointed at a lift bridge that showed itself between 2 buildings, and we made our way there in the late afternoon. Along the Danube, lamps came on one by one. The chain bridge threw its necklace of light over the water. Ice skimmed the edge near the stone piers. We walked to the middle and leaned on the rail as a riverboat slipped under us. A tourist couple with a camera asked if they could take our picture, and then insisted on one with both of us. We stood without leaning in, but shared a look that made the frame warm anyway. Later, I scrolled through the shots and stopped at the one where we were both mid-laugh eyes, half closed, the bridge strung behind us. I opened my social app and chose that photo. My thumb hovered while I searched for a caption that did not explain or defend. I typed, stopped waiting for doors, found a bridge. I hit post and put the phone away. The wind lifted hair off my forehead and set it down again. Bells from a tram clanged softly across the river. At dinner, our group shared a long table in a restaurant deep under a street. The walls were old brick, the tables varnished until they took the light and sent it back. A violinist played a melody near the kitchen, and the server translated dishes with patient delight. Tom ordered stew that came in a bowl the color of clay and stained with paprika. I ordered cabbage rolls and spooned sour cream that looked like snow. Wine shone in glasses and breath puffed near the doorway when it opened and closed. "Are you hearing from home?" Tom asked later as we walked toward the hotel. He pointed with his chin at my coat pocket where the phone sat heavy. "I am," I said. I did not take the phone out. A message from Dan had bloomed on the lock screen when we rose from the table. So had one from Kara. The phone had pulsed in my hand like a small animal. I had let it settle. We turned into a square where candles burned in small rows, set out for no one and for everyone. People stood with paper cups and spoke quietly. The cold pressed coins of color into cheeks. Tom stood close enough that I could have reached his sleeve. He did not ask more. You always travel in winter, I said. After June died, summer felt like a story that did not belong to me, he said. Winter tells the truth. It does not pretend. He said it lightly, without trying to teach anything. He looked at the window of a pastry shop and smiled at a lineup of meringues that leaned like small mountains. I was glad for how he looked at things before naming them. Back at the hotel, I took the paper star from my bag and unfolded it. The points opened slow as petals. I hung it on the window latch with the red string. The gold threads caught and held the street light. For a moment, the room felt like a lantern. When I picked up the phone, the screen bloomed bright in the dark. Likes had stacked in neat lines. Friends had sent hearts and short notes. You look well. That city suits you. There were messages from neighbors who had not spoken in months. Then the ones I knew were waiting. Dan, Mom, where are you? Are you with someone? Then, please call me. Kara. I did not know you were traveling. You look different. Who is he? I closed the messages without answering. I turned the volume off and watched the room shrink back to its usual quiet. In the hall, a suitcase wheel clicked past the door. Someone laughed and then softened their voice. The next day, our group drifted through the Christmas market near Vers Marty Square. Stall roofs wore white. A man hammered designs into copper, the blows ringing like a small bell. I bought a simple wooden angel, its wings carved thin enough for light to seep through. Tom returned from another stall with 2 paper cups, a curl of steam rising from each. You looked like you needed this, he said. What is it? Cocoa, he said, the kind that cures whatever you do not speak about. He handed me a cup and we sat on a low wall. Snow began with a reluctance that gave way to a steadier fall. The first flakes melted on the cocoa lid, then started to survive. People drew their collars up and kept on walking. A choir gathered near the steps and sang in voices that did not push. Silent night moved across the square in a thin veil. Tom's hand brushed mine when we shifted our cups. He did not pull away in a hurry or make a point of staying. It was an honest touch, nothing more. I took my phone out and opened the photo again, the one on the bridge. The comments were still piling little balloons of attention. I let them sit. For a few breaths, the square and its sounds erased the battery icon in the clock. The cocoa warmed my mouth. The snow lifted the sharp edges off the day. The phone began to vibrate. The screen showed Kara's name in clean white letters. I watched it pulse. Tom looked at me but did not ask. I let it ring twice, then pressed decline. The snow thickened and made a soft roof of the air. The choir kept singing. My cup steamed. The paper star waited in my window, catching whatever light it could. Snow came in the night and left the city clean. The roofs wore a white hush. Footprints laid small histories across the square. I woke to the radiator ticking and the paper star catching a seam of pale light. The room held a quiet that felt earned. I made tea with the kettle on the desk and watched breath fog the window while the street below began to move. Vendors raised stall shutters. A boy kicked at a ridge of snow until it gave way in soft blocks. By afternoon, the air had the blue tone of late winter. Our guide led us down a side street and into a restaurant that lived under the pavement. The ceiling arched low. Brick glowed amber, as if the walls were keeping a slow fire. The place smelled of garlic, roasted peppers, a hint of wine that had soaked wood for years. Candles stood in old bottles. Wax had folded into drips that looked like frozen waterfalls. We took seats at a long table. Plates came heavy and warm. Steam rose in curtains. Someone near the end ordered a stew that smelled like paprika and smoke. My spoon tapped porcelain. Tom sat across from me and turned his napkin in his hands as if he were smoothing a map. The violinist paused to tune, then found a line of melody that sounded like a road returning. When the first plates cleared, Tom reached into his coat pocket. He did it slowly, almost as if he was asking the room to approve. He set a small wrapped parcel by my plate. The paper was blue with stars. The tape was careful. I touched the corner and felt the box inside. "What is this?" I asked. "Nothing big," he said. It made a sound I wanted you to hear. I pulled the paper open. The tin shone dull silver, stamped with tiny constellations. A small crank sat on one side. I turned it. A simple melody rose out thin and grainy and wove itself through the clink of glassware. Silent Night traveled one note to the next, with all the bravery of a single voice in a large room. People around us looked up for a moment and then back to their meals. "You carry warmth with you," Tom said. "I thought you might like a pocket version." I turned the handle again and watched the little teeth catch and release. The sound did not push. It asked and then waited. I felt the compass against my skin and thought of the porch light at home. I set the music box on the table and let it sing itself quiet. Rob used to leave the porch light on, I said. If a neighbor worked late, if someone drove up the hill by mistake, he said one light could help anyone find the right turn. Tom listened the way he walked beside me with room and with care. His hands rested on the table empty as if to show he had nothing to hide. I need to tell you something, he said. He looked down at the music box, not at me. I almost told you on the plane. I waited. The violinist shifted to another corner. The server passed with plates held high. A glass bumped a glass and chimed. My brother Caleb served with a man named Rob Hart, Tom said. Norfolk, late 70s. He brought me to a cookout once. I was visiting on leave. I remember a woman by the grill with dark hair pulled back and a laugh that made a circle on the lawn. Someone had carved initials into a piece of cedar, R+E. The man with the cedar called her his North Star. Heat rose behind my eyes before I could tell it to wait. I saw the backyard like a photo, the thin paper plates, the damp of summer on skin. Rob holding up a board with my name cut bold and uneven. He had sanded the edges so I would not catch a splinter. He had looked at me as if I were a direction. You were there, I said. For a few hours, he said. I did not know you. I knew how your husband said your name. The room kept its hum indifferent and kind. I looked at the small tin box and felt the past lay its palm on the present without pressing. Why tell me now, I asked. Because it is true, he said, and because the way things connect matters. I did not want you to think I was trying to be anyone else. He leaned back and let the candlelight find the lines at the corners of his eyes. He did not reach for my hand. He let the table hold the space between us. Rob wrote in a small journal, I said. Boxes of them. Plans for boats he never built. Lists of screws. Places we wanted to go and did not. He called me North Star once. I pretended I did not hear because it embarrassed me. He kept saying it until I could hear it without flinching. The server slid plates of pastry and poppy seed across the table. The sweetness cut the spice still living in the air. I ate a bite that tasted like walnut and honey and let the flavors argue. Tom lifted his glass and then set it down without drinking. His voice dropped a measure. I think he would like that you are here, he said. He sounded like a man who wanted things to be alive around him. He said it the way you set a photograph back on a shelf in its exact place. Not to keep it from moving, but to honor how it lives there. When we left the restaurant, the street above welcomed us with a soft breath of cold. Snow fell in a sift that turned lamplight to halos. Our group walked in pairs or alone, each person entering the night at their own pace. Tom and I followed the curve of a narrow street that spilled us into a small square. Candles burned again in a low drift protected by glass cups. People came and went and left new flames. We stood without speaking. I took out my phone and snapped a picture of the window of a quiet shop. My paper star hung in the reflection small and faint, as if it had flown from my room to rest here. I sent the photo to Dan with 2 words. I am okay. The message left with a chime and I watched the screen until the status changed. Delivered. The reply came fast. Are you in Hungary? Who is the man in the photo? Please call me. The screen showed the bubbles of someone writing and erasing. Kara's message arrived a breath later. I did not know you were traveling. You look happy. Who is he? I put the phone in my pocket and felt its weight like a book. The music box sat warm in my other hand. I turned the crank once, then stopped before the melody could build. A bus hissed as it pulled to the curb. The smell of diesel threaded the cold. We walked to the river without making a plan. The water moved dark and sure. Lights doubled themselves on the surface. We leaned our backs on a stone wall and let the city go about its business around us. It felt right to be part of it without being the center. Do you want to tell them where you are? Tom asked. I want to answer without explaining, I said. That sounds hard, he said. It sounds necessary, I said. The wind tugged at my scarf and I tucked it in tighter. For a while we named what we were looking at. A boat with a string of lights like small moons, A couple arguing softly, then laughing as if the argument had been a mispronounced word. A dog shaking snow from its collar, the rhythm of a foreign city that had made space for us without effort. Back at the hotel, the hallway gave off the smell of polished wood. I could hear the soft roll of a suitcase 4 doors down and the quiet click of a lock turning. In my room, the paper star held its square of glow. I set the music box on the nightstand and placed the compass beside it. Metal, each with its own kind of pull. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the messages again. I read them slowly as if they were handwritten and I needed to be careful with the creases. I typed a short reply to Dan. I am safe. I love you. I added nothing else. I deleted an extra sentence I did not want to defend. I sent it and put the phone face down. I wound the music box once. The notes lifted and settled like small birds finding a branch. I lay back and watched the ceiling gather shadows. The radiator ticked in a patient rhythm. The room held its shape. The phone buzzed against the wood. I let it hum. I closed my eyes and listened to the thin song until it slipped into silence. Dawn came thin and colorless. The window carried a skin of cold and the paper star held a small square of light as if it had saved it for me. I dressed in the quiet. The hall smelled of polish and coffee. Downstairs, the clerk nodded and poured from a pot. I took the cup into the street where the air bit the inside of my nose and made my eyes water. On Gellert Hill paths cut through the snow like pale veins. The city spread itself in grays and amber bridges clasping the river with steady hands. My boots made a sound like tearing silk when they left the crust. I tucked my scarf tight and stood where the wind could not reach the back of my neck. The compass lay flat and cold against my skin. I took out the tin box and turned the crank once. A single line of melody rose and faded. I put the box away and pulled the phone from my pocket. I called Dan. He picked up fast as if he had been sitting with the phone in his hand. Street noise reached me through his end. A door closing. A seatbelt clicking. Then his voice. "Mom, where are you?" "Budapest," I said, "on a hill above the river." He was quiet. I could hear him breathe. "Why did you not tell me?" "You told me to stay home," I said. I let the air hold the words, so I found one. He did not rush to fill the space. I heard the small sound of his thumb rubbing the phone against his palm, the sound he made as a boy when he was trying not to cry. "We should not have done it that way," he said. "I thought we were managing the days. I was wrong." I took the compass in my fingers and felt the needle move and settle. The wind tunneled between trees and moved the snow in soft sheets. "It is not a court," I said. "No one is on trial." "I know," he said. I heard him swallow. "Are you alone?" "I am with a tour," I said. "I have what I need." Another voice came through faintly. Kara, careful and low. I could not make the words. Dan covered the phone and spoke to her. A latch snapped. The sound of a car driving. He came back. "Kara wants to say something," he said. There was a shuffle and then Kara's voice reached me smaller than usual. "I thought I was simplifying," she said. I made the circle smaller and I did not see who fell out of it. Snow sifted across my boots. The city breathed. A late bell tolled far off and took its time crossing the water. "I am all right," I said. Kara let out a breath that had been held too long. "I do not expect you to fix it for us," she said. "I just wanted to say I am sorry." "Thank you," I said. Dan came back on the line. "Will you come to Savannah?" he asked. "We can drive up and get you. Today. Tomorrow. Whenever you say." I looked at the river and the bridge that wore its lights like a garment. I thought of the suitcase open on the bed and the paper star in the window. I thought of the cocoa in the square and the organist stirring the air to life. I felt the words settle where they belonged. "I am staying," I said. "I will see you after the holidays." He did not argue. He did not sweeten it. He let it be. "Okay," he said. "Are you warm enough?" "I am." "Eat," he said, and I smiled because he had sounded like me. "I will." We sat a moment with the line open. "I love you," he said. "I love you," I said. When the call ended, the hill gave back its silence. I put the phone away and stood with my hands inside my coat palms on ribs, feeling the body that carried me upstairs and across oceans. The cold had found my cheeks and colored them. The sky showed a narrow seam of blue. Tom was waiting where the path met the road, a paper cup in each hand. He took one look at my face and did not ask. He handed me a cup and fell into step. "Coffee," he said, "or something near it." The cup warmed the place between my fingers. We walked down without speaking. A dog shot past us, a blur of white against white, and threw itself into a drift with joy so sharp it almost hurt to watch. A woman in a long coat laughed and called the dog back. Her breath hung in the air and broke into little pieces. We crossed to the river and moved along the promenade. The lamps had gone out and the day stood on its own light. Barges worked the center channel. The water made lap sounds under the wall. A man on a bench read from a book with gloved hands. We stopped in the middle of the chain bridge and leaned on the rail. The city kept its balance. "Thank you for not asking," I said. Tom sipped from his cup and looked out at the water. "You looked like you had been brave," he said. "Bravery makes its own noise. It is better to listen first." He said it plain, not as praise, as observation. He kept his gaze on the current. "I told them I am staying," I said. He nodded once as if to mark the sentence done. A bus crossed behind us and made the bridge tremble for a breath, then set it back on its pilings. The tremble ran up the rail into my bones and faded. We walked to a bakery and stood at the counter while the glass breathed on the inside. The case held pastries arranged like constellations. I pointed to one with apricot and a ridge of sugar. Tom chose something braided and glossy. We ate standing the steam, loosening our faces. A shard of pastry landed on my coat and he flicked it away without fuss. Outside the square had filled with people carrying paper bags and fir branches. The choir from the night before was back on the steps. Their voices rose into the weak sun and warmed it a degree. I took my phone from my pocket and opened the photo from the bridge, then closed it. I turned the camera to the street instead and took a picture of the lamps along the river, the bulbs not yet lit their glass a dull gold. I opened the app and wrote a line that fit in the white space under the frame, leaving the light on for myself. I posted it and put the phone away. The words felt as if they had turned a key. We spent the afternoon in a museum where rooms were the color of tea. Paintings leaned their quiet forward. People moved with the soft steps of those who respect edges. In a corner, a guard stood with his hands behind his back and looked at a wall as if it were water. Tom paused once in front of a landscape and tilted his head. He did not ask what I saw. He waited to hear it if I wished to say. By evening, the snow had tightened into a crust that popped underfoot. We ate in a small place that made soup with depth and bread with a crack you could hear. The table was set with heavy spoons and small glasses. The server left us alone and kept the water full. Tom told me a story about his brother learning to swim at a quarry, and I told him about the time Rob and I got lost on a Forest Service road and ended up at a picnic with strangers who fed us peaches and ribs. The way we spoke allowed the pauses to work. Back in my room, the paper star held faith with the streetlight. I set the compass on the nightstand and touched its lid. The music box sat beside it. I wound it once and let it play until the teeth slowed. The sound walked itself into the corners and sat down. The phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. A message from Dan. "We left a card on your table." The words sat simple and square. I pictured the kitchen, the bowl with the cinnamon sticks, the loaf wrapped in wax paper, the light that flickers when it wants attention. I tucked the phone under a book and turned off the lamp. The room shifted into the softer dark that belongs to places with snow outside. I lay quiet and let the heater sing its low song while the city settled around me like a hand. The flight home sank through a wool sky and set down with a soft grip. By the time I reached Asheville, the afternoon had given up its color. The street was damp and smelled like pine and wet earth. My porch boards wore a faint bloom of mildew I would scrub later. I fit the key in the lock and paused. The compass lay against my collarbone, steady and cool. I turned the knob and stepped into the small breath a house takes when someone comes back. The kitchen held its old arrangement. Bowls nested in bowls, the wooden spoon with the burn mark near the handle, cinnamon sticks in a glass jar. On the table, a white envelope waited, centered without fuss. Dan's handwriting sat on the front, the careful print he uses when he wants no mistake. I slid a finger under the flap and tipped the card out. A photo fell first. The kids in striped pajamas, grins wide, one sock half off. Behind them, a tree with colored lights and a paper chain draped like sugar. Inside the card, the words were simple. "We missed you. We are sorry. Dinner soon." The line felt plain and right with no decorative bows to loosen later. I stood in the doorway and listened. The heater hummed. A truck downshifted on the hill. The house held still like a friend who knows when to keep still. I set the card on the mantel beside the photograph of Rob, laughing at something I could not see. His eyes crinkled a smear of sawdust along his jaw. I wanted the apology to live in a place you could reach without climbing for it. I unpacked slowly. The paper star went to the front window. I smoothed each point with my thumb and tied the red string in a small, neat knot. The gold threads found the weak winter light and made something of it. The wooden angel stood by the salt jar. The tin music box belonged on the nightstand, near the glass of water where rings of condensation always gather. I set the compass on its hook by the photos, then took it back down and slipped it over my neck. Habit, this old has its own gravity. In the living room, I checked the porch light. It wobbled in its socket. I tightened it with 2 short turns. The filament glowed, not bright, not tired, a good middle. From the front steps, the street looked familiar and unknowable in equal measure. The air smelled faintly of smoke. Somewhere someone had lit a fire. They came on Saturday. The doorbell rang, and then small fists thumped the wood, because patience is not a skill children prize. I opened to faces I know by heart. The cold moved past them into the house, and then broke apart. The kids barreled to the tree and pointed at the paper star. Kara stood with a dish wrapped in a clean towel and a set of eyes that did not hide. In the kitchen, she set the dish down and reached for plates. Her hands moved in my cupboards with the caution of a person who once felt free there and now asks again. We worked side by side, the rhythm easy to find. Steam rose from the roast in the oven rosemary oil, lifting into the air and sticking to our sleeves. The bread cracked when I cut it. Butter softened on the table. Kara touched the edge of a plate and looked up. Her voice was soft and not careful, just true. I made something small feel smaller, she said. I thought it would make it manageable. I am sorry I did not see what that did. I nodded. I passed her the bowl of salad. I did not need to teach anything. She had done her own work. Dan kissed my forehead as he set a stack of forks by my elbow. He looked at my face for a second longer than usual, like a person reading a map they finally understand. He said nothing large. He lifted the pot from the stove and poured gravy into a boat that had a chip along the lip. The steam fogged his glasses, and he laughed, a sound I know from when he was 10 and discovered fog breath in winter. We ate in a spill of warm talk and small spills of gravy, and the sound of chairs shifting on old wood. The kids argued about who would tear the wishbone, then forgot it and fed the dog under the table. Kara asked for the story of the market with the copper hammer. Dan wanted to know if the baths were as hot as the pictures made them look. I answered in pieces. I told them about the organ practice in the empty church and the chessboard resting on stone in a bath full of steam. I told them about the cocoa that cured whatever you did not speak about. I let the pictures do their work. Who is Tom? Dan asked, not as a test, not as a stare, just as a question belongs at a table. A friend, I said, a good one. It was enough. He took a roll from the basket and split it and passed half to me without looking down. After dinner, we moved to the living room. The kids sprawled on the rug and built a house from blocks that never fit entirely, each piece negotiated into place. The paper star took the porch light and folded it into brighter edges. I wound the music box and set it low. The notes climbed out and found space in the house without pushing anyone aside. Kara leaned back into her chair and let her eyes close for a breath. Dan sat on the floor with his back to the couch, the way he did as a teenager when the couch felt like a friend you could lean on without asking. Later, when the door closed and the cold moved in to claim the entryway again, I washed plates in water that almost hurt. I dried them with a clean cloth and stacked them so their rims lined up. I turned out the kitchen light and stood under the porch light with my finger on the switch. The night had gone clear. The neighborhood held a layer of quiet that felt like the pause between a held note and the one that follows. I left the porch light on. It cast a pool that touched the top step and the edge of the rose bed and a sliver of the walk. Months turned. Spring leaned into summer, then eased back to winter again. The paper star yellowed in the sun, and I cut another from the package I had carried home. I tied it with the same red string. The compass hung on his hook when I cooked, then came back to my neck when I dried my hands. The music box learned the rhythm of my evenings. Some nights I let it play only 3 notes. Some nights I gave it the whole song. 1 year from the day I set my suitcase down, the house filled again. Pine scent walked the hall. The table held more plates and more elbows than it had in years. Kara's mother brought a pie still warm enough to breathe. We made room for everyone who had been missing from anyone else's picture. Dan stood at the head of the table with a glass raised and a wet ring under his hand. To Mom, he said, for lighting the porch. Chairs scraped. Glasses touched gently. The The toast moved through the room and softened the edges of things that had been hard. We ate. We told small stories. The kids showed me a dance the school had taught them for the winter program and fell down laughing halfway through. When night lay its weight on the roof, I walked them to the door and tucked scarves into coats and kissed cheeks as if they were still young enough to protest. The yard smelled like frost and the faint iron of cold. I watched their car taillights reach the corner and turn. The quiet that came back to the house did not feel like absence. It felt like a place with a chair left empty on purpose, waiting for whoever needed to sit. I went to the mantel and straightened the card with the careful words. I checked the knot on the paper star and touched the angel's wing. I wound the music box and set it where its sound could travel. I stepped onto the porch and stood under the light. Warmth pulled along my shoulder. The bulb hummed small and steady. Inside the heater began its soft opening note. I turned the porch light on again and left it burning. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.